At 65 years old, a helpless widow named Clara stood on her own farm, watching cold corporate lawyers walk across her gravel driveway. It was a freezing November morning, and the bank was hours away from selling her 420 acres of land. They claimed she owed them thousands of dollars, a debt her late husband never mentioned. The lawyers held clipboards and eviction notices, expecting the old woman to pack her bags and leave quietly. But they made one massive mistake. They forgot about a single faded paper receipt hidden inside an old iron milk crate on the porch. What was written on that tiny piece of paper would completely ruin the bank's cruel plans and stop the auction mid-sentence. If you have ever seen greedy people try to steal everything an honest family spent their entire life building, stay with me until the end of this story. Clara had lived on this land for over 40 years. She moved here as a young bride after marrying her husband, Thomas. Back then, the farm was just a small piece of rough earth with an old tractor and a tiny barn. Together they worked from before sunrise until long after midnight. Thomas took care of the corn crops, while Clara managed the books, fed the animals, and cooked hot meals. Through freezing winters and blistering summers, they poured every single dollar they earned back into the soil. Slowly, they bought more land until the farm grew to 420 beautiful acres. For Clara, this place was not just dirt and trees. It held the memory of her husband's laughter, the sweat of their youth, and the quiet security they had built with their own hands. When Thomas passed away quietly in his sleep, the farm fell silent. The crops were leased to a kind young neighbor, and Clara spent her days sitting on the front porch, keeping her husband's memory alive. She was grieving, lonely, and vulnerable. And that was exactly when the bank decided to strike. 6 months after Thomas died, a man in a dark corporate suit knocked on Clara's door. He handed her a stack of thick legal documents filled with confusing words. He told Clara that her late husband had taken out a secret loan of $314,500 many years ago, using the farm as collateral. According to the bank, Thomas had missed his payments, and the deadline to pay it back had expired. Clara was stunned. Her husband was a meticulous man who hated debt. He recorded every single penny they spent in a small pocket ledger. She told the banker there must be a mistake, but the man just smiled coldly. He pointed to the bottom of the document, where Thomas's signature was clearly stamped and approved by a local notary. The bank gave Clara an ultimatum: pay the massive debt in full within 30 days, or give up the land. Clara had no money to hire expensive corporate lawyers or forensic handwriting experts. The bank assumed a lonely 65-year-old widow would just get scared, pack her bags, and surrender the property without a fight. They were so confident that they bypassed the usual court delays and scheduled a forced public auction right on her front lawn. The morning of the auction arrived, cold and gray. Bidders, neighbors, and bank officials filled Clara's driveway. The auctioneer had already raised his gavel, preparing to sell the first block of land. Clara stood inside her house, looking out the window with tears in her eyes. She felt completely helpless against a system built to crush ordinary people. Knowing she had to leave, she walked out onto the porch to gather her few remaining belongings. As she reached for an old, rusted iron milk crate she used for storing firewood, her foot caught on a loose wooden floorboard. The crate tipped over, spilling old wood and dust across the porch. Clara knelt down to clean up the mess. That was when she noticed a tiny corner of yellowed paper peeking out from a narrow crack between the floorboards. It looked like it had been dropped there years ago and forgotten. Her fingers trembled as she pulled it free and wiped away the dust. It was an original, carbon copy bank deposit receipt from June 14, 1998. As Clara scanned the faded ink, her heart skipped a beat. This was not just a random piece of paper. It was the missing puzzle piece that exposed the bank's entire lie. Clara did not run or cry out. She quietly walked off the porch and stepped right into the middle of the crowd of bidders. The bank's lead attorney looked down at her with a polite but impatient smile, expecting her to hand over the keys. Instead, Clara held up the tiny yellow receipt. The receipt proved that 28 years ago, Thomas had fully paid off the exact line of credit the bank was now claiming was overdue. Not only was the loan entirely settled, but the receipt bore the official digital stamp of the bank's own headquarters, signed by a bank manager who had retired a decade ago. The bank had deliberately buried this record in their old digital archives, assuming Clara would never have proof of the payment. By hiding the receipt, they had fabricated a fake default to steal 420 acres of prime real estate. Clara looked the corporate lawyer dead in the eye and said, "The auction is over. Get off my land." The junior associate standing next to the lawyer looked at the date on the receipt and whispered, "Sir, she's right. The lien is invalid." The auction was cancelled on the spot. The crowd of buyers dispersed in whispers, and the corporate SUVs drove away, leaving Clara alone in the quiet morning air. But she didn't just stop there. The next morning, Clara took the original receipt straight to the county courthouse. When the judge reviewed the document alongside the bank's fraudulent foreclosure filing, he didn't just dismiss the case, he ordered a full investigation into the bank's predatory practices. It turned out that the bank had used this exact trick on 4 other elderly landowners in the county, stealing properties before anyone could contest them. Because of Clara's discovery, the bank was forced to return over $600,000 in escrow funds to local families and pay a massive federal fine. The fraudulent company they used to process the paperwork was permanently shut down by the state. Clara went right back to her quiet life on the farm. She didn't hold a press conference or brag about her victory. She simply put the yellow receipt safely inside her husband's pocket ledger, where it belonged. Thomas used to tell her that a person should always keep their own records because nobody else would do it for them. He meant fuel receipts and seed totals when he said it, but Clara found out at 65 that his words meant something much larger than that.